I think for me it's very interesting to be here because these two projects articulate two very important dimensions that are rarely discussed, I think, that I know of, which are the relation between the effective sexual relationships and the school dropout or the school trajectories. So it's very important to make these links between how the dimensions of effective sexual and dimensions of young adults' lives cross their educational trajectories, their educational options, and their educational choices. I think I congratulate you because it's a very rare combination, and I think it makes the whole sense. And for the last 15 years, more or less, I've been working on sex education in Portugal. And during the last 3 years, I've been in the Ministry of Education. So I stopped my research on this specific topic. But it was interesting for me to also to understand the educational policies that are being thought and implemented in Portugal in terms of equality, equal policies, and citizenship policies. So before I talk to you about the sex education policies, specific sex education policies in Portugal, I would like to share with you some data about these two dimensions, the school trajectories and the sexual and effective sexual affective lives, in order you to get know more about the context and the social context of Portugal. So just some brief data. I don't know if it's like this. Okay, yeah. So in order to situate these, I brought some important data that I think it's important for you as well to know about the Portugal situation. So regarding the early school leaving situation, as many of you know, Portugal has been a case study in Europe. It's been a international case study because over the last 30 years, as we can see, we reduced our early school leaving from 50% to 6%, and nowadays it's 5.9. I know this is a very important issue for Spain also, because you also have a huge ESL rate. And I think it was important to show you because it's interesting to see how the educational trajectories have been changing throughout the years, especially from 2000 and onwards. And I think I'm going to show you another, yeah. I think this is, of course, many of policies contributed for that. One of them is, as you can see, the secondary education completion rate also increased, and especially because our secondary education is compulsory, so we have to be in school until 18 years old. So when Mar asked me, or the challenge that Mar poses to me was to talk about the current situation and the need to approach effective sexual education in the secondary school curriculum. I think it's important for you to know that our secondary education is compulsory, and that had an impact, a huge impact in the ESL dropout, and the ESL dropout, and the school dropout, and ESL. And I think going back to the first data, it's interesting to see also how this is a gender issue as well. So as you can see, gender emerges as a significant factor in abandonment and the ESL. So in Portugal, from the 6% of ESLers, 7.9 are boys and 3.9 are girls. So this is an interesting thing as well. So when we look at findings through a gender perspective, we found that ESLA's path are strongly marked by gender issues as well, gender perception, gender expectations. So when we look at the school trajectories, we must think about it. So I brought here some data from, I think it's, yeah, here. So in previous projects I've been involved in, namely the Heslo project called Reducing Early School Leaving in the European Union between 2013 and 2018, one of the largest European projects around early school leaving, and about youth trajectories of dropout and school failure that brought together 9 European countries. We realized that the girls' motivation for leaving schools were very much linked to reasons of effective sexual relationships, of interest into serious relationships, or teenage pregnancies. So before and becoming ESLers, all young women from our research seem focused on initiating family life and remain as caretakers. Caretakers, some got pregnant, some look after ill parents, or others want to live with their boyfriends. As for the boys, the trajectories were more unstable and job-oriented. So this was one of the first impression of how the school trajectories are also crossed by sexual and affective lives. Going further, in another project on sexualities, youth and teenage pregnancy in the north of Portugal I've been involved in, the relationship between pregnancy and motherhood and the decision to drop out of school was evident. So it seemed that like the life project of motherhood and the project to pursue studies seemed to be incompatible. And as the majority of you know Lisa Rai in her research on teenage pregnancy and the consequences of early motherhood highlights, it's important to say that the society's negative attitude to young mothers marginalized an already excluded group because they are already in a yes seller path. And I also brought here some data, more recent data, about how young people, Portuguese young people, are living their sexual and affective life. So more recently, in 2022, during the COVID, according to health behavior in school-age children in Portugal, based on a sample of 45,000 young people from 11 to 15 years, we can see that the majority of them are not living in a current romantic relationship. But the most interesting data is that 23% think they are in a romantic relationship, and they think it's one of the most important things in my life. So they consider the relationship is the center of their lives. And when we look at the age of first sexual intercourse, you can see that we have 20% of students with 12, 13 years old that are starting their sexual intercourse, and also that many of them are not using contraception, still not using contraception. And so this report was interesting because it crossed young people with 11, 12 years old to young people with 15, 16 years old. And among the adolescents reported having already had sexual intercourse, it is interesting that the older students, like 15, 16 years old, consider that they are in a romantic relationship, and that is the most important thing in their lives, and they use contraception, contraceptive pill or condoms in the last sexual intercourse. But the younger students report don't have used or not having used a contraceptive pill or a condom during their intercourse, the last sexual intercourse. So this is also an alert for us to think that something is not going well in the communication and education, sex education in schools, because they are still not using contraception. In terms of issues of gender, sexual and gender diversity, it's interesting to see how these continue to mark the experience of educational success. So according to the FREE project on the experience of LGBTQ plus youth in Portuguese schools in 2020, and Calma Fernandes is one of the authors of that report and is here as well with us, so if you want to talk to him later. So most participants reported experience of discrimination and homophobic bullying. as well as underrepresentation in the curriculum. So schools remain focused and focus on being a future as hostile environments where LGBT students choose to be invisible. Similarly, in another project developed in 2020 led by George Gatt as well, and researchers from our faculty and University of Porto, on the perceptions of self-identified LGBTI youth regarding their school context, most participants report experience of discrimination and several sources of prejudice were identified. Again, participants also recognize a lack of LGBTI information in school curriculum. So it seems that schools, the way schools seek to integrate LGBTQ plus themes into their curriculum and deal with this problem is still far from being enough and is not always perceived by this population as ineffective. Also in terms of including transgender young people or transgender issues with school connectedness and perceptions of school climate is still also very, it's still an issue. And findings show that transgender youth were more likely to be truant from school, to experience victimization and bias-based bullying. So why I thought it was interesting to bring all these data, because when we look at sexual and affective relationships, sometimes we don't realize how is to live their sexual lives inside schools or in the school context, and how schools must deal with that, and how this is important during the school trajectory and for the success of these students. How can we approach young people and young adults as students, but also as sexual subjects, and also as young adults that have lives and have choices besides schools. So, I thought it was interesting to see that, because if we don't realize that, the majority of our public policies or educational policies to fight ESL, for instance, or to understand the success trajectories are going to keep, how do you say, are going to not being well suited, because they are not being recognizing all the dimensions that cross students' lives. So all these findings have implications for improving educational policies and to create safer and supportive school climates. And that's why I would like to show you the political policies, the public policies on equality, citizenship in education in Portugal, so you can, understand this is how this has been going. Because indeed, from the moment that schools don't seem to keep up with these current challenges, and the access to education is mitigated to some of these students based on sexual orientation, based in their sexual reproductive choices, this issue becomes urgent. So the negative impact of these issues, of this experience in terms of mental health, well-being, educational success, is our responsibility as well. Okay, so this may cause us obras, no? So why this is interesting to talk, because Portugal is considered one of the most egalitarian countries in Europe in terms of lesbian, gay, sexual, transgender, intersex individuals' legal rights, and nowadays in terms of education policies. That's why it's so surprising that you still lack of specific policies in some of these issues. So debates of last decades. As you can see in the slide, it is worth recalling some recent legal landmarks regarding sexual and gender rights in Portugal. So, okay, I'm going to finish. So in 2007, we have the decriminalization of voluntary interruption of pregnancy by women up to the first 10 weeks at the women's choices and option. In 2009, we have the first sex education, the first school-based sex education, and that includes for the first time sexual diversity and gender identity in the curriculum. In 2010, the same-sex marriage law, and in 2011, and subsequently upgraded in 2018, the gender identity law by the legal gender recognition on self-determination to include the possibility to change legal gender at the age of 16. And these debates, as Pam already said, there's a difference between the political and the legally intentions and the practically. But at least legally, we are very advanced. And fueled by these legislative advances, the education sector has made acknowledged progresses in 2018. I'm going to show you quickly. Especially because it has been framed by two national strategies, the National Strategy for Equality and Non-Discrimination between 2018 and 2030, Portugal More Equal. And in the light of this strategy, there are three different plans. And the third plan, as you can see, the National Plan of Action to Combat Discrimination on Grounds of Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Sexual Characteristics, for the first time, there's a specific planning on combating this discrimination. And also, finally, the National Strategy for Citizenship Education that implements citizenship as compulsory subject within the curriculum. And that's where sex education gets into. So the changes in the sex education policies became a clear, came as evidence as of clear shift of political action towards citizenship and sex education rights. So if in 2084, 2099, 2009, and 2018, so each decade was a different decade for the sex education policies, it was interesting to see how the sexual health focus changed to the umbrella of citizenship rights. So nowadays, sex education is compulsory inside citizenship education, and it's compulsory from the age 5 years, from the 8 years old to 18. I'm so sorry. I'm going to finish. And I think it's important to say that schools are expected to work on gender equality and sex education in all cycles of basic education. And in secondary education, it was the challenge that you posed to me, the theme of sexuality education continues to be worked, but in a transversal way. So, of course, I have more things to say, but I have to finish. But as Pam also said, the doubts that persist and the incoherence sometimes between the schools, the students' reality, young adults' reality, and the message of sex education in schools are still at the center of the agenda, and we must work on that. So, of course, I would love to share with you more conclusions and more reflections on that, but I think that there's a lack of sex education as a right of sexual and intimate citizenship, and which remains our main concern. And we need to change this vision on sex education. And thank you very much.